close your eyes and imagine yourself drifting back in time. The air is warm, the sea shimmers in the distance, and marble temples rise against the bright blue sky. You are in ancient Greece, land of philosophers and warriors, of myths and markets, of gods worshipped and men remembered. Yet life here was not always glorious. Beyond the shining statues and famous names, there were struggles, hardships, and endless routines. In this journey, we will walk through the streets of Athens, sail across the Aegean, enter the theaters, temples, and battlefields. We will see not only the legends of Greece, but also the daily lives of those who lived in its shadow. Settle in, let your breath slow, and allow yourself to drift as we explore 10 parts of Greece's story, calmly, quietly, one after another. Imagine waking before dawn, long before the sun rises over the olive groves. You are a farmer in ancient Greece. Your life is not marble or philosophy, but earth, stone, and sweat. The soil is thin, rocky, and stubborn. Year after year, you struggle to coax life from it. Wheat and barley, grapes and olives, these are your staples. Without them, there is hunger. You bend low, working with a wooden plow pulled by oxen, feeling the rough soil resist every push. Your hands are calloused, your back aches, and still the land gives little in return. Water is scarce. Rain falls unevenly, and when it does, it often rushes down hillsides, carrying the soil with it. Droughts are feared, but so are floods. Every season is a gamble, and every meal depends on the outcome. You live simply. Your house is small, with walls of mud brick and a roof of clay tiles. Inside, there is little space, just a hearth, a bed, a few jars for oil and grain. Family life is close, but privacy is rare. Taxes weigh on you as much as the plow. The city demands grain, the lords demand rents, and the gods demand sacrifices. At every turn, what little you earn seems to slip away into the hands of others. And yet, there are moments of beauty. The scent of olives carried on the wind, the quiet rhythm of sheep bells in the hills, the calm of twilight after a long day. These simple comforts are what make the endless labor bearable. Life as a Greek farmer is not glorious, it is survival. And though poets will write of gods and heroes, the truth is that most of Greece was built on the tired backs of men and women like you, digging in the earth season after season. Picture a young prince in the ancient kingdom of Macedon. The year is 356 BCE. His name is Alexander, son of King Philip II and Queen Olympias. From the very beginning, he was destined to be different. Legends say that on the night of his birth, the temple of Artemis at Ephesus burned a sign. Many believed that a great force had entered the world. As a boy, Alexander was not like others. His tutor was Aristotle, the great philosopher, who taught him about logic, ethics, poetry, and the natural world. But he also trained in the arts of war. He rode horses with ease, wielded the spear with confidence, and listened carefully as his father taught him the strategies of kings. There is a famous story from his youth, the taming of Bucephalus, a wild horse no one could ride. While the others mocked and gave up, Alexander noticed the animal feared its own shadow. Gently, patiently, he turned the horse toward the sun, calming it, and leaped onto its back. From that day on, Bucephalus carried him through countless battles. It was a symbol of Alexander's gift, not brute force, but keen observation and fearless will. When his father was assassinated, Alexander became king at just 20 years old. Many doubted him too young, too untested, but he acted swiftly. He crushed rebellions, secured his throne, and then turned his eyes outward. For Alexander, Greece was only the beginning. His dream was vast: to conquer Persia, the great empire to the east. With a small army of loyal soldiers, he crossed the Hellespont, stepping onto Asian soil. At the Battle of Issus, at Gaugamela, again and again, he outmaneuvered armies many times larger than his own. His strategies were bold, his courage unquestionable. He fought at the front, side by side with his men, his golden helmet shining in the dust and chaos of war. Everywhere he went, cities fell, empires crumbled. He entered Egypt and was hailed as a liberator. In Babylon, he walked through ancient palaces that had stood for centuries. He pressed further and further, his ambitions unending, until he reached the very edges of India. His soldiers, weary and longing for home, begged him to turn back. For the first time, Alexander relented. At just 32 years old, at the height of his power, he died suddenly in Babylon. The cause remains a mystery: illness, poison, or perhaps exhaustion from years of relentless conquest. His empire stretched from Greece to the Indus River, the largest the world had ever seen. Yet, within years of his death, it fractured, divided among his generals. And so Alexander became less a ruler and more a legend. The stories of his battles, his charisma, his unshakable ambition spread across centuries, shaping the way we imagine kings and conquerors. He was called the Great, not only for what he won, but for how far he dared to dream. To imagine Alexander is to see a figure astride Bucephalus, armor, gleaming eyes fixed on the horizon, always chasing a world just beyond reach. He lived quickly, brilliantly, and burned out before his flame could fade. High in the mountains of central Greece, where the slopes of Mount Parnassus rise above olive groves and winding paths, there stood a sanctuary that drew travelers from across the ancient world. This was Delphi, the home of Apollo's oracle, the place where mortals came seeking the voice of a god. Imagine yourself climbing the stone path that leads to the temple. The air grows thinner as you ascend, cool and sharp in the morning, fragrant with wild thyme and pine. All around you are offerings left by kings and city-states, glimmering bronze statues, golden tripods, marble treasures brought to honor the god. Delphi was not just a holy site, it was a treasury of Greece, where the wealth of nations glittered in the sunlight. At the heart of it all stood the temple of Apollo, its white columns rising against the blue sky. Inside, in a dark chamber beneath the temple floor, sat the Pythia, the priestess chosen to speak for the god. She was not a queen or a noblewoman, but an ordinary woman of Delphi, transformed through ritual into the mouthpiece of Apollo. The process was shrouded in mystery. The Pythia would purify herself with water from the Castalian spring, chew leaves of laurel sacred to Apollo, and take her seat upon a tripod above a fissure in the earth. It was said that vapors rose from the ground, filling her lungs, carrying her mind into trance. Her voice would shift, sometimes murmuring, sometimes crying out, words spilling forth in fragments and riddles. Pilgrims came from every corner of the ancient world to ask their questions. A general might ask whether to go to war. A city might ask where to plant a new colony. A farmer might ask if the harvest would be good. The answers, always, were given in riddles. You will go, you will return, Never in war will you perish. But was that a promise of safety or a warning of doom? The interpretation was left to priests, and through them the fate of nations was shaped. Even kings trembled before the oracle's words. Croesus of Lydia once asked if he should march against Persia. The oracle replied, "If you cross the river, a great empire will fall." Croesus believed it meant Persia's empire. Instead, it was his own that crumbled. The mystery of Delphi has never fully faded. Modern scholars debate what truly happened in that chamber. Some suggest that gases, perhaps ethylene, seeped from beneath the earth, bringing the priestess into trance. Others argue it was pure ritual, a performance sustained by faith. Whatever the cause, the effect was undeniable. For centuries, the oracle's words held sway over Greece and beyond. Now picture the sanctuary at twilight. The pilgrims have left, the last offerings placed upon the altars. The mountains darken, cicadas fall silent, and the stones still hold the day's heat. You can almost hear a whisper, carried on the wind, words half-formed, a riddle never meant to be fully solved. The Oracle of Delphi was not about certainty, but about mystery. It gave answers that unsettled as much as they guided, leaving mortals to wonder whether the voice they heard was truly divine or a reflection of their own fears and desires, spoken back to them in riddles. If you step away from the dusty fields where farmers toiled, away from the cramped workshops where potters and weavers bent over their labor, you would eventually enter another Athens entirely. It was the Athens of marble courtyards, shaded porticos, and banquets that stretched late into the night. This was the world of the Greek elite. Imagine a nobleman's house, not from the outside from the street. Even the homes of the wealthy looked plain but from within. Step across the threshold and the scene changes. Sunlight filters into a central courtyard where a small fountain splashes gently into a basin. Around it stand painted columns, their colors vivid reds, blues, and golds. The floors are smooth mosaics, arranged in intricate patterns of dolphins, vines, or mythological scenes. The air smells faintly of oil lamps, wine, and fresh bread from the kitchen. The master of the house, dressed in a finely woven himation cloak, spends his day not in manual labor, but in discussion and politics. He might stroll through the agora, speaking with other citizens, or take part in the assembly, raising his voice in debates about war, trade, or justice. His wealth buys him freedom from work, and with that freedom comes influence. Meals for the elite were more than nourishment, they were events. The symposium was the center of upper-class life. Reclining on couches, arranged around low tables, men drank wine mixed with water, their cups adorned with painted scenes of gods and heroes. Musicians played the flute softly, dancers moved with careful rhythm, and the conversation flowed, sometimes philosophical, sometimes playful, sometimes sharp with satire. Guests competed in wit, reciting poetry, or sparring in riddles. For women of the elite, life was more secluded. While men debated and feasted, women oversaw the household, managing servants and weaving fine textiles. Yet, within their world too, there was grace. Courtyards filled with flowers, religious festivals where they played honored roles, and the quiet rhythm of domestic ritual. Children, if fortunate, were taught by private tutors, learning letters, music, and the art of rhetoric from an early age. Contrasting with the struggles of common farmers or soldiers, the elite lived in relative comfort. They had access to perfumes, jewelry, and imported luxury silks from the East, spices from far-off lands, glassware from Egypt. They could afford leisure, the time to study, to write, to commission plays and paintings. It was in this environment that philosophy, drama, and art flourished. But this privilege was built upon inequality. The wealth of the elite rested on the labor of slaves and the tribute of conquered lands. Their symposiums glowed with lamplight, because others worked in darkness to keep the lamps burning. Their debates about democracy were possible because others, women, foreigners, slaves, were excluded from citizenship. And yet, within those high walls and polished halls, the Greek elite cultivated a vision of life that still captivates us. The pursuit of beauty, the celebration of ideas, the belief that conversation, poetry, and thought could shape the world. Picture it as the night deepens. The last cups of wine poured, the fire in the brazier dimming. The guests recline, voices soft now, laughter fading into drowsy silence. Outside, the city of Athens hums with the life of thousands. But here, in the quiet courtyard of the elite, only the stars remain above, steady and eternal, as they always were. Every 4 years, across the mountains and valleys of Greece, travelers would set out toward Olympia, a sacred grove in the Peloponnesus. They came not only for sport, but for ritual, for honor, and for the hope of touching something divine. Imagine the journey. Dusty roads lined with olive trees, caravans of men carrying offerings, priests chanting prayers to Zeus. By the time you arrive at Olympia, the sanctuary is alive with noise vendors calling, athletes training, poets reciting hymns, and officials arranging the contests. The air is thick with the smell of roasting meat from sacrifices, mingled with the sweat of thousands gathered under the sun. At the center of it all stood the great temple of Zeus, its colossal statue glittering with gold and ivory, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. To compete here was not only to prove strength or speed, but to dedicate oneself to the king of the gods. The athletes, stripped naked, their skin rubbed with oil to gleam in the sunlight, stepped into the stadium. They were not professionals in the way we imagine today. Many were farmers, soldiers, or noble youths. But here, before the watching crowd, they became something more. The contests were fierce yet sacred, running the length of the stadium, wrestling on the packed earth, hurling the discus or the javelin, racing chariots drawn by snorting horses. The rules were strict. Cheating meant humiliation, your name carved into stone as a warning. Victory, however, brought eternal glory. The prize was simpler, wreath of wild olive leaves, cut from a sacred tree by a boy whose parents were still alive. Yet that wreath carried more honor than gold. Cities welcomed their victors with triumphal processions, statues, and feasts. Their names would echo for centuries, bound forever to the rhythm of the games. But beyond the contests, the Olympics were a truce. During the festival, wars paused. Enemies laid down their weapons to gather in peace. For a brief moment, Greece remembered its unity. Merchants traded, poets performed, and philosophers debated under the same sky. The games were not just sport, but a mirror of Greek ideals, competition, excellence, and reverence for the gods. Now picture the sun setting over Olympia. The day's contests are over, the crowds dispersing, the athletes lying in weary silence, their bodies aching, but their spirits proud. In the distance, the temple glows in the fading light, and the olive wreaths, simple and green, rest upon the brows of those who have triumphed. For the Greeks, this was not just sport, it was a glimpse of immortality. In the heart of Athens, at the foot of the Acropolis, there was a place where the city gathered not for war, not for politics, but for stories. This was the theater of Dionysus, carved into the hillside, its stone seats rising in sweeping arcs beneath the open sky. It could hold thousands of people, citizens, foreigners, even slaves, all sitting side by side, waiting for the actors to appear. The air was warm, scented with dust and olive oil lamps, the murmur of voices rising and falling like the sea. Above them loomed the Parthenon, shining in the morning light, while before them stood the stage, simple but sacred. Here, men in masks and robes would transform into kings and queens, gods and monsters, heroes and fools. The plays were more than entertainment. They were woven into the very fabric of Athenian life. Every spring, during the festival of Dionysus, the city honored the god of wine, ecstasy, and theater with performances that lasted for days. Entire families came, bringing food, settling into the stone benches, their eyes fixed on the stage as dawn gave way to dusk. First came the tragedies. Imagine the voice of an actor, deep and steady, carrying across the crowd without need of amplification. His mask, painted with solemn lines, seemed almost alive in the sunlight. The chorus entered, moving together, their voices rising in song, recounting the fate of heroes. The stories were heavy with destiny. Oedipus, who could not escape the prophecy. Agamemnon, destroyed by the curse of his own house. Antigone, who chose duty over law. The audience did not laugh or cheer. They listened, they reflected, they felt the weight of human frailty. To watch a tragedy was not to be entertained, but to be reminded of the limits of power, of the inevitability of suffering, of the delicate balance between mortal will and the will of the gods. Then, after the heaviness of tragedy, came the comedies. Bright masks, exaggerated gestures, actors running across the stage in padded costumes, mocking politicians, philosophers, and even the gods themselves. The crowd roared with laughter as Aristophanes' characters plotted absurd schemes, poked fun at their neighbors, and turned the troubles of Athens into humor. For a few hours, life's burdens lightened and laughter carried through the open air. Yet theater was never only about amusement. It was also education, ritual, reflection. It was a mirror held up to the city, showing both its greatness and its flaws. The tragedies asked, what does it mean to be human? The comedies asked, how foolish can humans be? Together, they created a rhythm, a cycle of sorrow and joy that echoed the rhythms of life itself. Picture the theater as evening falls, the seats of stone still warm from the sun, the stage empty now, the masks and robes set aside. The city grows quiet, the Acropolis darkens against the stars, and yet the words linger. Even in silence, the stories remain eternal, timeless, waiting to be told again. In the shaded courtyards of Athens, beneath the olive trees, and along the colonnades of marble temples, another kind of gathering unfolded. It was not for war, nor for theater, nor even for worship, but for thought. Philosophy, the love of wisdom, was a way of life for the Greeks, and Athens became its beating heart. Imagine yourself walking through the city on a warm afternoon. The air is filled with the hum of voices, merchants calling in the agora, craftsmen hammering in their workshops, children laughing in the dusty streets. Yet, just beyond the bustle, under the shelter of a portico, sits a circle of men. robes draped loosely, their voices calm and measured. They are not trading goods, but questions. Socrates, perhaps, sits among them, barefoot and plain, his eyes sharp, though his appearance is unremarkable. He does not lecture. Instead, he asks, "What is justice?" He might say, "What is virtue?" And when someone answers, he asks again, peeling back the layers of certainty until only more questions remain. To listen to him was to realize how little one truly knew, and yet, in that unknowing, there was a strange kind of clarity. Later, his student Plato would gather pupils in a grove outside the city, the academy. Imagine it, paths winding through olive trees, the sound of cicadas in the heat. Young men sitting on benches, listening as Plato spoke of forms and ideals, of a higher reality beyond what the senses could see. His words were not meant for the marketplace, but for the mind's eye, guiding it upward toward truth. And then came Aristotle, walking slowly with his students, a scroll in hand. He preferred not to sit, but to move as he taught, pacing through the shaded colonnades of the Lyceum. His thoughts were grounded, practical, attentive to the world as it was. Plants, animals, politics, logic, nothing was too small, nothing too large. To Aristotle, wisdom lay in observing the patterns of nature and human life, and arranging them into order. Each school offered a different path. The Stoics, gathering later in the painted Stoa, taught endurance and calm, urging men to accept what they could not change, to live in harmony with nature. The Epicureans, in a quiet garden, taught that pleasure, simple, moderate, and free of fear, was the key to peace of mind. Philosophy was not abstract to the Greeks. It was practical, a guide for how to live, how to govern a city, how to treat a friend, how to face death. These questions were not confined to scrolls, but woven into daily life, debated in the agora, whispered in symposiums, echoed in theaters. Now picture the city at dusk. The philosophers' voices grow softer, the courtyard cools in the evening air. The questions remain unanswered, but that was never the point. It was the asking itself, the gentle rhythm of thought, the calm unfolding of ideas that shaped Greek life. And in that quiet, one begins to feel why Athens was not only a city of stone and politics, but a city of the mind. To live in ancient Greece was to live beneath the watchful gaze of the gods. Every hilltop, every grove, every stretch of sea shimmered with their presence. The Greeks did not imagine a distant, silent deity, but a world alive with divine personalities, powerful, unpredictable, and ever near. Imagine standing at dawn before a small household altar. The air is cool, carrying the faint scent of burning olive oil. A father sprinkles barley grains over the flame. A mother pours a libation of wine. A child places a garland of flowers. These were not grand acts of worship, but daily gestures, woven into the rhythm of life. For the Greeks, the gods were as present as the morning sun, as constant as the changing tides. But on festival days, the devotion swelled into grandeur. Picture the great Panathenea in Athens. The city thrums with preparation. Women weaving an enormous new robe, dyed deep saffron and embroidered with scenes of gods and giants. Young men polishing shields and tuning lyres. Priests leading cattle adorned with ribbons and gilded horns. As the procession begins, the streets are filled with music, drums echoing against the marble walls. At the head, citizens carry the robe to the temple of Athena, draping it upon her ancient wooden statue. It is a celebration not only of the goddess, but of the city itself. In Olympia, worship of Zeus blended with athletic contest. In Delphi, the smoke of burning laurel drifted through the air as the priestess of Apollo, seated upon her tripod, delivered cryptic words that kings and generals would travel across mountains to hear. Her voice, rising with the fumes, was believed to carry the gods' will. The myths themselves carried as much weight as the rituals. They were not told as fairy tales, but as truths layered with meaning. Stories of Zeus and Hera reflected power and jealousy. Tales of Demeter and Persephone spoke of loss and renewal, of the changing of seasons. The wanderings of Odysseus revealed the struggles of endurance and fate. For the Greeks, myth explained the unexplainable. Why the sea grew violent, Poseidon's wrath. Why lightning struck, Zeus's hand. Why harvests failed, Demeter's grief. The gods were not distant ideals, but woven into daily existence, at once revered and feared, and yet the relationship was intimate. A fisherman might whisper a prayer to Poseidon before casting his net. A soldier might promise a votive offering to Ares if he returned alive. A mother might dedicate a lock of her child's hair to Artemis for protection. These small acts linked mortal lives to immortal powers. Now imagine night falling in Athens. The Acropolis rises dark against the starlit sky, the Parthenon gleaming faintly in the moonlight. The torches from temples flicker in the wind, their smoke curling upward into the heavens. The gods may not be seen, but to the Greeks, they were always there, present in the whisper of the leaves, the crash of waves, the roll of thunder. To believe was not a choice. It was simply to exist within a world shared with the divine. War was never far from the lives of the ancient Greeks. Their cities, though proud and independent, often turned against one another. And so the art of battle became a constant rhythm of their existence. Yet, unlike the thunderous wars of later empires, Greek warfare was both intimate and ritualized, bound by custom and shaped by discipline. Imagine yourself in the early morning, standing upon a plain just beyond the walls of a city. The grass is wet with dew, the air heavy with the metallic scent of bronze. Rows of men gather, farmers and potters, merchants and shepherds, now clad in armor. These were the Hoplites, citizen soldiers, carrying a round shield, a long spear, and the weight of his city's honor. The shields, or hoplons, gleamed in the rising sun, their polished surfaces reflecting the faces of those who stood shoulder to shoulder. When they formed the phalanx, each man's shield overlapped with his neighbor's, creating a wall of bronze and wood. Safety did not lie in individual strength, but in unity. To falter was not merely to risk oneself, but to endanger the man beside you. The clash of battle, when it came, was sudden and brutal. Yet in the telling here, it is enough to imagine the sound, the steady rhythm of boots pounding the earth, the scrape of spear against shield, the low roar of men advancing in unison, the line pressed forward like a single creature, straining against the opposing force until one side yielded. Victories could be swift and defeats devastating, but the essence was always the same: discipline, courage, endurance. Beyond the land, the sea was equally vital. Greece, with its jagged coasts and scattered islands, depended on mastery of the waters. Picture a fleet of triremes resting at anchor, their long, narrow hulls carved from sturdy timber, painted with the eyes of gods to ward off ill fortune. Each ship carried nearly 200 men, their oars arranged in 3 tiers, ready to move as one. When battle began, the triremes cut through the waves with precision. The rowers pulled in perfect rhythm, their strokes measured by the steady beat of a drum. Speed and maneuver mattered more than sheer force. To ram an enemy ship with the bronze-sheathed prow was the aim, splintering wood, throwing men into the sea. Above, hoplites stood ready on deck, while archers loosed arrows that whistled through the salt air. The most famous clash of sea power came at Salamis, where Athens' fleet, though outnumbered, triumphed over the Persians. Imagine the straits filled with the cries of men, the crash of oars, the tearing of hulls. And yet, for the Greeks, such victories were not merely about survival. They were about freedom, identity, and the defense of their way of life. When the battles ended, the soldiers returned to their farms, their shops, their families. The armor was hung on walls, the ships drawn ashore, the scars of war left upon the land. Life resumed, as though the conflict were a passing storm, but the memory of it lingered in songs sung by poets, in statues raised in city squares, in the silent weight of shields that would never again be lifted. Now picture the stillness after battle. The plain lies quiet, the sea calm once more. In the hush of twilight, the echoes of war fade, leaving behind only the knowledge that, for the Greeks, warfare was both a burden and a bond, a reminder of how fragile and precious their freedom truly was. Not all lives in ancient Greece were marked by hardship and toil. For the elite citizens, especially in Athens, life offered another rhythm, a slower, more indulgent pace, filled with comfort, learning, and social ritual. Imagine yourself walking through the courtyard of a wealthy home. The floors beneath your feet are mosaics, tiny tiles arranged into swirling patterns of dolphins, vines, and mythological figures. The walls are painted with bright colors, reds, blues, and ochre's hue, reflecting the wealth of the household. Columns frame the open atrium where sunlight streams in, falling gently upon a pool of clear water that mirrors the sky. The air smells faintly of olive oil and sweet resin. Slaves move quietly, tending to the household, carrying trays of fruit, pouring wine into elegant ceramic vessels. In one corner, a woman spins fine wool into thread, her spindle turning in slow rhythm while a child plays with a small clay figurine. This was the domestic world of the Elid Torterly, abundant, shielded from the harsher rhythms of the common life outside. But the true heart of elite leisure came in the evening at the symposium. Picture a long room, its walls lined with couches. Men recline upon them, supported by cushions, their sandals set aside, their robes draped loosely. Bronze lamps glow softly, filling the space with warm light. The air is rich with the scent of incense, the sweet notes of wine mixed with spices, the quiet strum of a lyre played by a musician seated in the corner. The symposium was more than a feast. It was conversation elevated to ritual. The wine, mixed with water in large craters, was poured by young attendants. Each cup was lifted, not only in drinking, but in honor of the gods. Toasts to Dionysus, to friendship, to the city. And with each round, the talk grew looser, yet always circled around matters of philosophy, politics, poetry, and the nature of life itself. Imagine the voices, calm and measured at first, then warmed by the rhythm of drink. One man recites a verse from Homer, another responds with lines of Sappho. A guest poses a question: what is love? What is courage? What is the good life? The room falls into thoughtful silence. Then answers flow like the wine itself, measured, poetic, reflective. It was not about solutions, but about the joy of sharing thought, the comfort of being heard. Beyond the symposium, leisure might also mean strolling through the gymnasium, where philosophy and exercise mingled together, or visiting the theater, where art and society met, or simply walking along the coastline at dusk, gazing out upon the Aegean, the sea shimmering in the twilight. For the elite, leisure was not idleness, it was considered refinement, the cultivation of the soul. Now, as the night deepens, picture the symposium quieting. The lyre's strings fade into silence. The lamps burn low, their flames flickering against the painted walls. Guests rise slowly, departing into the cool air, their sandals tapping softly against the stone streets. Overhead, the stars gleam brightly, and the city sleeps in their glow. In these moments of comfort, of thought, of shared humanity, the Greeks found balance between the demands of their city and the pleasures of life, between duty and delight. And though centuries have passed, the echo of their voices still lingers, soft as the night itself. And so we come to the end of our journey through ancient Greece, from the dusty training grounds of the Hoplites to the shaded courtyards of philosophers, from the bustling markets of Athens to the quiet rituals offered at home altars. We have walked through a world both familiar and distant. Life in Greece was never simple. It carried hardship and conflict, but also wonder, beauty, and a deep devotion to questions that still echo through time. To be a Greek was to live between opposites, struggle and leisure, faith and reason, war and art. And somehow, in that balance, they created a legacy that still shapes the world today. As you lie back now, listening to these words, you may picture the marble temples, the olive groves shimmering in the breeze, or the vast Aegean Sea glistening under the stars. These images drift softly through the mind, like fragments of a dream, ancient voices carried gently across the centuries. Let the rhythm of their lives fade now into the rhythm of your breath. Let the questions they once asked about courage, about justice, about the good life settle quietly in your thoughts, not to demand answers, but to soothe you as the night deepens. The world of ancient Greece is far away now, yet its calm echoes remain, guiding you gently toward rest. May sleep come to you easily, as softly as the sea against the Greek shores, carrying you into a night of peace.